everybody. You're all very welcome along to the Tallaght Historical Society. So just before we get underway tonight, usual housekeeping rules, which are, if we could all just make sure our mobile phones are on. I'll remind you to switch them on or put them back on before you leave. Tonight is a very special yearly event here. Welcome, because this is the annual Leo Swan Memorial Lecture. Leo, a noted archaeologist, was a founder member of Tallaght Historical Society and is fondly remembered in the area as principal of Our Lady of Hope Primary School. He was also a great friend to Tallaght Library throughout the years. Tonight's lecture on the archaeology of South Dublin County will be given by Rosaleen, Dwyer, the heritage officer. Just before we go any further, she asked me just to give you a little, she gave me earlier on, just to kick things off, put us informed of this. What was the most popular kids movie back in the days of ancient Greece? Anybody know the answer? Troy Story. Cleopatra said to her attendant, "I'd like a milk bath, pasteurised," says he. "No," she says, "just up to me neck." And without further ado,
I deny all knowledge of those jokes. You're very welcome here this evening, and I'd just like to say thank you very much for the invitation to speak tonight. As Ken said, I'm the Heritage Officer in the Council, and my role is to prepare and implement the County Heritage Plan. This is dated 2010 to 2015, so next year I'll be starting the process all over again. And there are some here in the audience tonight who were through the whole process with me 5 years ago. It's hard to believe 5 years have come and gone. But in this document there are 70 odd actions, objectives and actions that we were to achieve as a council on behalf of the community to protect and enhance and to raise awareness on the various elements of heritage that are in the county. And what I want to show you tonight is just some of the archaeology projects that were undertaken under the Heritage Plan, particularly in the last couple of years, and to show you where we're going with these and where I would hope to bring them even further to fruition over the course of the next Heritage Plan. Now there are a few of those Heritage Plans here for you, so there may not be enough so I can get many more. I have another box back in the office which I'd be happy to get rid of before we start the new plan. And I'd be hopeful that all of you here tonight would have a lot of comments and a lot of suggestions to make when we start the public consultation process next year for the new plan. So you'd be very welcome to make your own comments at that stage. So I'm going to make this work at some stage. Right, there's the Heritage Plan. Grant. The Heritage Plan projects, the archaeology projects I want to talk to you about tonight are, there are 4 separate projects. The first one was the accessibility survey, where we looked at all of the monuments in the county and to see which of those were physically accessible or whether they were visually accessible, and to determine their condition, and then to try and determine which of them would be good to develop heritage tourism trails and talks and walks around it. The second one, which was kind of related to the first one as well, was we did it as well specifically for the Dublin Mountains. And in that one I partnered with Dwyer, with the Heritage Officer in Dwyer, to look at all of the archaeology across the Dublin Mountains, because as of yet we think there's a huge story there to be told. And as heritage officers, we very often get involved in joint projects across our county boundaries with adjacent heritage officers, and we share our resources and we share our knowledge that way. Also we share the cost, which is very important. And the third one then would be the investigations that we've commenced up at the Hellfire Club last year and this year, and we hope to propose for next year. And then finally, very exciting project, which I hope the internet connection will stay live long enough for, is to show you we've just finished, again, for Dublin Heritage Officers, we were working on an archaeology website where you can access now all of the previously, maybe I suppose very difficult to get hold of, reports from licensed archaeological digs all over Dublin. and whatever records as well that the National Monument Service would have held in their topographical files. It's all available online now. So, as I say, if the internet connection holds true, then we'll have a scoop through that. If we start first with the accessibility survey, these are the two reports here, and they're separated into two volumes because one of them really focuses on the lowland sites and the other one then focuses on the upland sites. And we did this in conjunction with UCD, who did an excellent job in doing what we asked them to do to the highest standard. And the main objectives of the study were to, as I said earlier, to assess the current level of public access to all of the monuments that we have in the county, and to determine the extent and condition of those. Like, were they crumbling? Were they in good condition? Could you access them safely? Were they on public land? Were they on private land? And from that knowledge then to pick a number of sites that could be determined as being key archaeological sites. Maybe because you had a huge group of them in the one place, or they were of a range of ages from prehistoric time to modern time. So whatever made them special and whatever made them unique enough that people would want to go and visit them, not just ourselves, but visitors to the county too. And then, as I said, that was then to help us identify potential heritage routes through the county. So as I said, all the work that I do has to relate to one of the 70-odd actions in the Heritage Plan. So to justify why I do what I do, I also have to relate it back to what's in the plan. So this accessibility survey then would have addressed both of these actions in the Heritage Plan. And the forum, the Heritage Forum, who helped me put the plan together in the first place, would have been quite astute about what the county needed. And obviously this first plan is more about finding out the information and gathering the data, and then the next plan next year, for the next 5 years, will be more about promoting it, getting the information out there and getting people involved and enjoying what we have and learning more about it. So the study then, first of all, obviously all desktop analysis. A phase always starts most projects like this, particularly when you have so many sites to deal with. There are 365 sites on the Sites and Monuments record for the county. So the first stage of this process then was to sift out the ones that actually don't have any surface archaeology for us to look at. And that reduced the number of sites down to 187. So 187 sites were deemed as warranting field visits during this survey phase. So the field inspection started, and the objectives there obviously were to establish the extent of the remains and to what extent these were visible and accessible, assess the current condition of them, and assess their potential for future public access, because again, some of them may just have needed a little bit of work to make them more accessible to the public, and then recommend how they could be enhanced and presented to the public in a way that people who would visit them would walk away with a full understanding of why they're important or what was interesting about them. And that access, you know, we've kind of looked at it as well. It can be physical access, which I much prefer. I much prefer going up and looking at something and experiencing it hands-on. But there's also the whole virtual world out there now, where you can access a lot of this stuff online, and they can, you know, reconstruct things, artist impressions, or they can make 3D laser scans of it and present it online. So it's very high tech. But as I say, I don't think that should take away from the actual physical on-the-ground experience as well. So after that, then we would have mapped all of the sites and taken data from all of those sources and making it available then online, which will be next year's work. So what did we find in this study? So of the 180 sites that we visited, 131 were either publicly accessible, or if they were on private land, that you could actually see them from public land, that you didn't actually have to go onto the land, but that you could see enough of them to understand what they were. And then of those 131 monuments and sites, 113 had above ground visible elements that were either physically accessible, so there were 77 sites in the county that you can actually go and visit because they're on public land, or there are 36 other sites that you can view from a public road or from parks. So there's quite a lot out there that we should be making more use of in terms of education programs or heritage trails and tours. The study identified 10 key areas of archaeological interest around the county, and we'll have a look at some of those in a minute. And 2 key sites were identified. That's the Clondalkin Round Tower, as I'm sure you'll all agree, is a key site in the county, and Woodtown Portal 2 as well, up in the mountains. And as well as that, then there are 12 high potential sites. Now, high potential sites are sites that you can access and you can see something above ground, but they actually need a bit of work to bring them up to a condition that people would appreciate enough to want to go and visit and understand their importance. So the key areas then, the 10 key areas that were identified. We'll break them down into 3 groups: prehistoric upland sites, the medieval heritage routes. They include the villages of Clondalkin, Tallaght and Newcastle. And then sitting out on its own there is Ballyman Park. You know Ballyman Park, over towards Clondalkin. It's got a fabulous range of habitation on the one small site, and it's on public land. Now, unfortunately, it needs a bit of work to bring it up to standard, but because of the range of monuments on it, it's deemed to be a key area for archaeology. So that is a map showing the distribution of those sites around the county. And you can see the 4 villages: Newcastle, Clondalkin and Tallaght being the medieval sites. In the Ballymount Park, you can see it there, over in the far right, just at the edge of the M50. And then the rest of the sites then are up in the uplands. They're the prehistoric sites. The report then separated them into different sectors and drilled down into each of those maps, providing as much information on each of the sites that they visited. And that's just a close-up shot of that particular map, up in the Dublin Mountains, overlooking down Small, where you have Massey's Wood and the Hellfire Club and Piperstown. And you can see a number of monuments throughout the rest of the county area as well. We have a huge archaeological record out there. So if we just look down quickly through some of the sites, and as I say, all of these then are open for us next year and the year after to start putting together the heritage trails and the tours. Now the library has a lot of walking tours that you can download from their website, and they've got maps and other documentation and lots and lots of background information. So we'll be adding to that and hopefully adding more information into it from the website I'll show you later. So Clondalkin, everyone is very well aware of how important the Clondalkin Round Tower is. It's the best preserved round tower in the whole country, I believe. It stands at over 27.5 metres tall. And close by in St John's Church Gardens, there then is the remains of a medieval church there, photograph number B. And sitting in that cemetery, in that graveyard, there are medieval crosses and a font. And obviously then close by is Tully's Castle. And Clondalkin is easy to get around, it's easy to walk around. You can see all of these things, they're quite accessible. Newcastle likewise, at the end of the, Newcastle at the end of the west end of the village, there's a very fine grouping of medieval features. You have the Church Byron Church, and there's a tower house there, photograph B. And the tower house is part of a private property. But the owner opens his house in Heritage Week every year to tours, to guided tours, so you can actually get in to see it. Photograph C then is the motte down in Newcastle. You can peek at it through the railings of the gate, and that view was taken from the top of the church tower, which gave you a very good panoramic view of it. The churchyard then has some interesting features. And then if you look at photograph E, you can see there is a lot of unmaintained heritage as well in Newcastle. That's on private property, and I believe it's in Nama at the moment as well. So the likelihood of that being maintained into the future is questionable. And then photograph F is St Finian as well. Tallaght, do I need to tell you anything about Tallaght? You can tell me more. You're well aware of the heritage that Tallaght has to offer in terms of St Whale ruins, the churchyard, the font, crosses, very old graveyards, and obviously St Whale ruins tree is also a recorded monument, is also a monument on the list, and the gatehouse then as well. So there's plenty to be seen, and all of those are accessible. So the recommendations then that would have come out of the study for the medieval routes is to negotiate access to those few sites that currently aren't easily accessible. One or two of those features that you would have seen in either of those three villages, may need permission to go and access. Particularly if you need access into the priory, you need permission. So it's a case of building relationships and working maybe for Heritage Week to have, or perhaps for a special day that you want yourselves to gain access to a lot of these areas. And how do we do that? For most of the sites, there is relatively little maintenance work is actually required to bring them up to a very good standard. So the heritage trails could be easily established for either of those three villages. And as I say, anything that we would do would just be building on the work that the library has already started on walking tours. Information panels and promotion is essential. Again, I may be old-fashioned, but I like to walk up to a board, display board, look at a map, see where everything is, and just go and visit it with just a little blur at the end of it to see what it is. I can then go onto my phone if I wish and access further information, but I don't think we can do without those boards on the site, on the ground. This is not what I did earlier now, it's not showing the photographs. Let's see now. These are the upland sites now that I'm going to look at. It's Balmascorny Woods, and I was showing you photographs of passage tombs, and the Barrow and Lodge Cairn. So we move on. Another one of the upland sites is Piperstown. Now that's on the east side of Glenismore Valley, just overlooking the valley itself. We discussed this one, whether we should put this in as a key site or not, because really when you look at it, it's not the sort of stuff that jumps out at you as being visible archaeology. If you walked over that ground without really paying much attention, you wouldn't be aware that you're walking over a very, very important archaeological site. It has, it's a very significant archaeological complex dating to the late Neolithic, and the features include 7 huts and 8 burial cairns. But as I say, you need interpretation to understand what you're looking at. And I suppose if we were to, that would be on the last of the list, I think, in terms of encouraging people to go and look at it. Also, it is accessible to a degree. There is a lot of private property up there, but there is also a lot of commonage. So you should be able to access it, but you'd have to be sure of where you're going so that you don't interfere with private property up there. But it is a very, very important site, and some of the areas there are, if you have somebody explaining to you what you're looking at, it's very, very rewarding. But as I say, that would need quite a bit of work to make it an enjoyable experience. Seaham Mountain. I think Seaham Mountain for me is just so dramatic. When you're up there, the views are just spectacular. You literally have 360-degree view from looking straight out over Dublin to the Liffey Plain. You can look west into Kildare, south into Wicklow, and east out onto the Irish Sea. And on a clear day, which I had when I was up there last time, it's just magnificent. And you could see why our Neolithic ancestors chose the high point of these mountains to put their burial tombs. The tops of mountains they're liminal spaces. They're the interface between land and the sky, and they're full of magic for our predecessors. And again, being such prominent locations, they were viewable from the lowlands. So everybody knew exactly who they were looking at up there, and why they were buried there, and how important they were. And these tombs across the Dublin mountains in particular all form one massive cemetery, which is widely spaced out, I appreciate, but when you're at the top of one of those mountains, you can see the cairns and the tombs on the top of the other ones. For most of them now, sometimes there are trees in the way, quaint property might obscure your view for some of them, but they are all there. So it's a magnificent cemetery landscape that we're actually looking at up in the Dublin mountains. So the features on Seaham include 3 passage tombs, a megalithic structure, and a ring fort just further north to it. A lot of people walk up to Seaham. And again, you have that concern that inadvertent damage may be done to people scrambling over the cairns or climbing into the passage tomb itself. So again, interpretation up there and alerting people to the fact that they are walking on a monument and that they need to be careful about slippage and making the rocks collapse. As well as the bog there itself, can become quite eroded. So it's how do you manage that? You want people to access these things, but you don't want them to cause too much damage either. Another of the upland sites are over there towards Saggart Hill. Do you know Saggart Hill? It's to the west of the N81, Sheaftool Wood and Lugwood. Again, you've got a concentration of prehistoric burial tombs, including 2 passage tombs in Saggart Hill itself, and 2 further passage tombs on the lower slopes, a ring barrow in Lugwoods itself, and 3 further barrows in an enclosure further south. So that's a huge collection of archaeology that is just asking to be interpreted in the correct way with appropriate routes and trails and information boards. Hellfire Club, I won't linger too long on the Hellfire Club because I will talk about that in more detail in a minute when we get to the Hellfire Club project we were doing this year. But the recommendation for all those upland sites again is that some of them require a much greater degree of maintenance and maybe the formation of construction of safe access routes into them. Maybe we should be promoting them in a different way to the lowland sites then as well, and we should be promoting them as landscape routes, that there are nodes on a wider route way. So for the real eager beavers who like mountain walking, they can start at one end of the Dublin Mountains and work the way all the way over to Dunleary right down. Or you can just go in and out at particular locations yourself. So the options are there for both choices. Now Ballymount Park, I'll just quickly look at, as I say, it's there on the, actually if you're on the Lewis and you come through, you come through the Red Cow and you're heading south, the park area you just passed through, on the right hand side is, you'll see the mound in the last 2 photographs there. Again, a significant concentration of medieval structures, and it was also habited prior to that because there are prehistoric ruins there as well. And so the features include a manor house, a gatehouse, a large enclosure, a substantial barrow, and a tower. And I have to say, like, a number of times when people hear that I'm the heritage officer in South Dublin, and if they're archaeologists, they say, what are you going to do about the gatehouse there, which is covered in ivy? And when I first came to Dublin many years ago, not that many years ago, I was aware of that as a tower. It didn't stand covered in ivy, but it does at the moment. So again, there is a lot of work needed to bring these particular structures in Ballymount Park up to a standard that will facilitate its interpretation and its enjoyment. That requires resources, and the council is looking at this particular park to see what can be achieved here in the near future. So, as I say, a lot of maintenance work required. There is graffiti and there's a lot of vegetation. Now, there's pluses and minuses there because the vegetation stops the graffiti, and if you take the vegetation off, you're exposing it to more vandalism perhaps. But again, you would hope that with better understanding and interpretation of the area over a period of time, you would hope to lessen that, we hope. So a heritage route through the park would be a very easy thing to establish once you have something appropriate for people to look at. Another recommendation the archaeologists made was that there had been previous archaeological investigations done on the site, particularly when the M50 was being built. So geophysical surveys could be added to that, and we could get a substantial amount of additional information if we did that. Very interestingly, as part of this project, the archaeologists, when they were out there, are always nosing around, and they know what they're looking at. Their skill is fantastic, and they picked up an additional 26 sites that they see as being new to the record of monuments in this county, and they forwarded these to the National Monument Service for their consideration to be included on the list. So, the story isn't finished. There's a lot there's a lot of stuff out there yet that is yet to be discovered, and these can only feed into our overall knowledge of the origins of this county. So we move on to the second project, the Dublin Uplands, which is an extension of what we've just looked at. But this part of the project was in conjunction with the Heritage Officer in Dundee Down. And what we did is we took the uplands, and that's anywhere area over 150 metres, contour level, and which stretched all the way from the N7 there, almost, all the way over to Shankill in Dundee Down. And we looked at key areas of archaeology across the Dublin Mountains, and there's huge potential for heritage trails and for drawing out that story of how our predecessors accessed the uplands and how they focused their ritual activities up there. This is the Slade Heritage Trail, which is another project I was working on over the last number of years down in the Slade Valley. There's the village of Brittis, and there's the N81, it's the N81. The British Ponds, do you know the British Ponds? Yeah. So these are the two woodlands I talked about earlier, Slieve, Toole and Lug. And one of the objectives we were looking at when we were looking at the Slade Heritage Trail is how do we incorporate a route all the way from Rathcoole through Saggart, up through the Slade of Saggart, which is a lovely big deep ravine, across the N81, how do you do that, around the British Ponds to finish at Brittis, and take in the archaeology and the cultural heritage and the wonderful biodiversity that's down in the Slade Valley as well. So that's a huge project that's running separate to all of this. But you can see from here the number of different archaeological features that I mentioned there earlier. So it's a huge concentration of information there, and how do we make the most of that? This one this was the band of Scorney Woods, the one photographs that didn't come up for me earlier. Again, you can see that there's quite a lot of archaeology remains up around there, and plenty of opportunities. The Hellfire Club, likewise, as I say, we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. And then over into Dundee Down, the tops of the mountains at Tibradden, at Kilmashogue and at Ticknock. There's a great concentration of information there. And over into Rathmichael, over right on the coast, which is a magnificent site because it literally just looks out over the sea. And you can imagine, like if you were a prehistoric family coming in your little boat past Dalkey Island and looking up at this massive tomb right up on top of Rathmichael, you would know that you were entering somewhere that was managed and minded and a place that was sacred. Now, this is the same map, but what I've put into this is, you see the purple squiggly line? That's the Dublin Mountains Way. You know, Dublin Mountains Way goes over the mountains from Tallaght all the way to Shankill. And the yellow line then is the Wicklow Way. So we put those two routes on the map just to see, again, is there a way where we can coordinate people walking on those routes with relevant interpretation along the routes so that people could get additional benefit when they're up there walking, that archaeology is accessible. It's along the Dublin Mountains Way or it's along the Wicklow Way, and if you walk 50 metres this way or that way, you'll see an interpretive board which will explain the landscape that you're walking on. The Hellfire Club then, this is the third project. Again, as I say, that has to address an action or two or three in the plan, and I was delighted to be able to start this. This was in conjunction with an archaeologist, Neil Jackman, who actually came to us with a proposal to look at the site up there to see if we could pull out the story a little bit more, because I suppose everybody here is aware of the Hellfire Club and its origins and its cultural stories, let's say folklore, the ghost stories, and all of the nefarious activities that did be going on up there, as they say. But from a purely scientific point of view, we had a number of objectives, which was to identify and examine and interpret the extent of the archaeological remains up there, because not very many people are aware that it's a very, very important archaeological site. And in fact, the passage tomb up there is probably the largest of the 11 passage tombs in the Dublin Mountains. But many people who go up there are only aware of the building itself, not the fantastic panoramic view when you're up there. So we needed to see, or we needed to kind of interpret the extent of those archaeological remains, and we had hoped to be able to provide more detailed evidence then for dating of human presence in the mountains. And obviously then as well to tell the historical and the architectural story of the Hellfire Club building and of the club that used to meet up there.
Yeah.
But that's where that is. This is a LiDAR image, which is aerial photography using high technology, which will give you a better picture of what's happening on the surface of the ground. You can see it much clearly there. So there's the large tomb, and there's the smaller one, and that's the building. So LiDAR is great in that it will show up a lot of those features that you don't normally see on, let's say, standard aerial photographs. And a lot of the sites actually that were new sites, newly identified sites in this project came about as a result of the UCD have a fabulous collection of LiDAR photographs. So they were able to sift through all of those and pick out areas that they could see as being new and unrecorded. So it's a very useful tool to be able to manipulate. Of course, as I say, there's a whole other story to the Hellfire Club that most people will be more familiar with. I love that phrase, brazen monsters, blasphemers and bacchanalians. Good old boys, basically. I won't go into all of the history of it here, obviously, because I'm focused on the archaeology, but part of the project is to look at the truth or otherwise of this whole culture back in the 1700s. And yes, I mean, it is believed that they did use the building up there. The building was built by the speaker Connolly in the 1720s, I think, and it was his hunting lodge. And he built it there, they say, so that he could see both his property, Castletown in Kildare, and Rathfarnham Castle, which he had bought from Lord Ely. So it was the prime location between his two properties. He could survey everything that he owned. But he didn't get to enjoy it that much. He died quite shortly after it was built, and it was then rented out. And these guys, who used to meet, I believe, in town, in Parliament Street somewhere, were thrown out of their lodgings down there, so they decided to go to quieter realms, and they decided to meet up there instead, where they could get on with whatever they were doing. So the survey will extend whatever information we have there, and there is a girl in Bristol University doing a PhD on the Hellfire Clubs in Britain and Ireland. And she has focused on the Hellfire Club here in Dublin as one of her sites. And there was another one in Limerick that she's also working on, but the bulk of her sites will be in Britain. So between her information, she's finished her PhD, and the survey information that we picked up ourselves, we start to put together quite a good picture of what the story is up there. And of course the architectural heritage of the site as well needs to be looked at, needs to be addressed in a more coherent way. Everyone will be familiar with the stories that the original cairn, the heap of stones that was on top of the passage tomb there, that a lot of those stones would have been robbed to build the hunting lodge itself. And then subsequently a lot of the fine stone was robbed out of that to build the house further down on the northern slopes of Montpellier Hill, Dollymount. So there was a lot of robbing going on. But people imply that the reason the place is haunted is because the tombs have been disturbed. And the archaeologist, when he was up there, had a really good look at the building as well. And I'll show you photographs there later on as well, where he feels some of the stones, the really big orthostas, the really big long stones, that would have formed the actual passage tomb itself. He thinks he has located somewhere in the structure of the building itself. So there's a big architectural story to be told about the house itself. Okay, so the first phase of the project was in 2014, where we did a geophysical survey and again a LiDAR survey of the site in conjunction with desktop research into the Fire Club itself. That then informed the results of that informed the second phase this year, where we did limited test excavations of 4 small trenches around the 2 tombs to look to see could we find material that we could date. And we can start putting a date on what's happening up there. Now the third phase, which will be next year, I propose to undertake a more detailed excavation at the large tomb site. So that's the plans then, when we'll see what happens, because the findings from the geophysical survey that we undertook and from the excavation work is that the 2 tombs on site are very evident, so they are there. We know they're there. They're not just... and one of them is actually in decent enough condition, the larger one. They are both affected though by all the disturbance in the past, primarily from the building of the lodge itself and then subsequent disturbance over the years. But the geophysical surveys, and I'll show you a nice detailed map of this now, the geophysical survey revealed a huge number of other features that that people hadn't been aware of before, such as like banks and ditches, pit features, very, very intriguing indication of maybe a 3-room structure, and I'll show you that, and other activity. So this is it cleaned up, let's say. So can you see there's the outline of the large tomb there, and the smaller tomb. But there are all of these other banks and features all around the place, and all of these little pink dots they think are maybe post holes, perhaps, for whatever structure may have been around it, either back in prehistoric times or more recent times. So there's an awful lot of information there that has to be sifted out, and that people have to tease out to see what is more recent and what is prehistoric. This, of course, caught our attention straight away. Like, what is that? So our original intention was that this year we would have done perhaps what we call a community archaeology project up there, where we would invite people to come and help with the archaeological excavation work under supervision and under training from the archaeologists. And we had hoped that we could start on that interesting little red coloured pin, and because we assumed that was going to be much more recent in origin than the prehistoric material, which would be very delicate and very fragile. So we picked 4 locations for our test excavations, which we undertook this year. Each of the pits measured 2 by 2 meters and were targeted at specific features of potential. We didn't want to go straight into the tombs itself because, again, very, very delicate and very sensitive areas without knowing what we were actually dealing with. So we picked areas around the edges of the tombs to try and get a handle on what was happening. Now, this isn't a great photograph, this isn't a great picture, but you'll see this was trench 1, this was where that little red intriguing feature was, and we thought we'd have a look at that. This is the large tomb here, so we picked a trench location just at the edge, and quite closely beside it where there appear to be these little pink post holes, and then a further one over by the smaller tomb, again, which appeared to have some interesting archaeology identified on it from the original map. So we hoped we'd get something out of that. Now, again, just to show you where those are. Yeah, there, just about there, and there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 tombs over there. So the first trench, up at the red structure that I was pointing out there, very disappointing. I'm not an archaeologist, I'm actually a botanist, So, you know, all geared up to see what was down here, and there was nothing. Now, the geophysics people who did the surveys up there kind of warned me. They did a couple of test days mapping and stuff out there, and there appears to be quite a lot of interference from the masts on Ticknock. Their equipment seemed to go in and out, you know, on a regular basis, so it was quite frustrating for them, which it took twice as long for them to do the job than they originally assumed it was going to take. But what they think is that we didn't find any tree-room structure at all up there, and they think that it's just an anomaly. It may be iron panel under the soil, further down under the soil, which was bouncing the material back at them. So, but why, I still can't understand why it came out as a lovely little tree-room structure. So there's obviously more work to be done there in that area. But there were a few pits which looked like post holes. But when they then excavated those, as you see in the photograph there, there was nothing in them. No, there was charcoal at the bottom of one of them, but it was also invaded with tree roots. So it could just be tree root holes, but that material has been sent out for dating and further analysis. So we get a better idea of what that was about. Trench 2 is the exciting one. And that was the one just at the edge of the large tomb. That one, I think, really excited the archaeologists, and we'll talk about that now in a second. Trench 3, again, that was between the big tomb and the small tomb. Nothing. And likewise, Trench 4. So, you know, they were quite excited about Trench 2, in that they saw what they felt was a curvilinear feature in addition to the edge of the cairn, which raises, you know, huge potential in the archaeologist's mind as to the nature and the importance and status of this large passage tomb on top of the hill, because it wouldn't be usual to have, in a European context, it wouldn't be usual to have an additional berm or a rim around a passage tomb. They suggest that if this is in fact what we're looking at, that it could be a subsequent phase of activity or ritual activity on site, so that the movement, in that the activity moved from inside the passage tomb to outside the passage tomb. And that could be because the passage tomb was full, it could be because it was a subsequent generation, or many generations later, who didn't want to disturb the original tomb, but went back and used an additional mound around it. So there's lots of questions there. So they got some material from those rocks, from the material that they excavated, and they've sent that off for further analysis and further dating. So they feel excited enough about it to want to go back and do more detailed excavation work, and that's what we hope to do for next year. The potential and closing elements of that curvilinear bund, let's say, into that in the LiDAR survey and in the remains of Trench 2, give a tantalising glimpse, let's say, of the continued ritual importance. Now, archaeologists are very cautious, which is just as well. They also suggest that it may not be anything like that. It may just simply have been a tumbling down of the rocks off the cairn itself when the tomb was being disturbed. So this is why they want to go back and have a proper look at it and do more detailed stratigraphic excavations before they can be sure. But again, like, the rarity of this type of feature in European passage tomb tradition definitely warrants further investigation. So that's what we hope to do in 2016. We've applied for a grant to undertake some excavation works of the larger tomb, and hopefully we'll get that. Obviously it's going to be funding dependent, it's an expensive business, but if we hear in January or February that we've got the grants, then we'd hope to be on the ground quite quickly in April and May. So watch this space, as they say. Now this, again, it's not shown in both photographs here, but these are the stones that I was talking to you about, that in the building itself, in the Hellfire Lodge, can you see the really big large stone at the end there with the white mark on it? But they believe that is one of the large stones that would have been robbed from the passage tomb itself. And there was another photograph on that, on the left-hand side, which showed it from the outside. And it's a perfect shape. I don't know why it's not showing up for me. So, if you can hold your attention for another 5 minutes, are we all right for time? I'll see if I can make this next internet link work, so I can show you the fourth and last project that I worked on. Again, this was in conjunction with the other 3 heritage offices in Dublin, over in Fingal in Dublin City and Dun Area right down. Now this was driven by the heritage officer and the archaeologist in Dublin City. Dublin City are very lucky to have an archaeologist on staff. And they had started 4 years ago to map and record all of the excavation licenses and all of the topographical files in the National Museum or the National Monument Service for the area between the 2 canals within Dublin City. And that proved to be a very, very useful exercise, very tedious and very time consuming. So we went for further funding then to extend that right across the 4 Dublin counties and to bring those records up to 2012. So all of those excavation licenses and anything in the monuments and in the museum are now online, available online. They were all the project partners involved in it. The Heritage Council provided 75% of the funding towards it, which was wonderful, and the rest then came from the local authorities. Again, I had to keep my paymasters happy, and we were able to address 2 and many more actions by making this information available. And this is it. Now I'll see if I can link to, was it duplicate, Sheila?
Yeah. It's actually on screen.
That's a PDF version.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if it works. Previous to this, if you wanted to see the excavation report, if you're an archaeologist and you want to do an excavation, you need a license, obviously. And part of the granting of that license is that you lodge the report with the National Monument Service when it's done and when it's finished. Most archaeologists will do that and will activate that, but very often they get lost along the way, or they're never finished, or the excavation never actually happens in the first place, or archaeologists move on and it just never happens. So the part of the task that of this project was to source all of that, all of those details, and put them all up online so that we could access them. And that information, I think this is actually it. So if you go into the heritagemaps.ie and click on the Dublin Archaeology data, this only went live last week, so it's very new. And again, it's not going to end there. There are many ways that we can fine-tune it and add further information to it. That's okay. There are all the project partners involved in it. And this is what it looks like. It opens as, this is just for Dublin County now. And what that looks like, a bad dose of measles, what it actually is a list of all of the locations of licensed archaeological digs in the County of Dublin. You can search all of them. You can search just the excavations, the licensed sites, dive surveys along the coast or along the river, geophysical surveys, and other map details. So if we zoom in, literally all you're doing is zooming into, let's pick somewhere that we're familiar with, Tallaght, and there are all the Now, if you just click on one of those, and so what we have here is there's the excavation number, and the address of the excavation, who had the license to undertake it, what they did, was there archaeology found? Yes. And you can click on that for more information, and that should bring up all the reports. So these have been very difficult to access, because if you didn't know the license number, you couldn't go onto excavations.ie and find them. It just was much more time consuming. If you didn't know the planning reference number, it was difficult to find them in the County Council website. Whereas this is, I mean, I'm gobsmacked by this body of work myself, in that the information that is now available at the click of the mouse, you know, it's fantastic. A lot of the material in South Dublin County is very recent, but if you go into Dublin City, I'm afraid this looks different to the way I had it earlier now, so I'm afraid clicking it in case it disappears on me. There is a site in here somewhere that I found that Leo Swan himself did, I believe. Again, there's plenty more information there and there. But if you look at some of the ones in the middle of Dublin City, they have an awful lot of information. Did they turn it off? No. There's an awful lot of information from the National Museum. A lot of their files are there, because a lot of it is very much related to Viking Dublin, and a lot of the information is just magnificent, because they've got information from the archaeologist to the keeper, correspondence details. Now, a lot of material, obviously, personal stuff is redacted, and that took a lot of time to go through a lot of that. But the information is just fantastic, and you'll spend, if you have any interest in this at all, you'll spend hours clicking on each of those and finding what they found. Surprisingly enough, when you open some of them, there will have been no archaeology found, and you'll be surprised at how many of those you find. But for the ones that do have archaeology, it's fantastic. Like, I looked up the Fair House Weir before I came in, and I found a report that I had been searching for the last 3 or 4 years, just there online, which is a fantastic gift. See, stuff like this. And it goes through all the details. Everything that's on file there is on that. So knock yourselves out, as they say. Next time you're bored, have a look at it. And what I would hope to do, leading on from this particular one, is like, look, if we are doing another trail, a more detailed trail through a location where there has been archaeological licenses, you can just glean all that information from it. Because a lot of this information was gathered as part of planning applications, so a lot of the land is now built upon, you know, shops, apartment blocks, roads, so you don't see any of it. But the information that's there has to be told, and that's what people want to hear when they're walking around on the trail. They like looking at things, but also like to hear a little bit more information about what's under the ground, or what was under the ground before the modern landscape arrived. So I think that's about enough.
So what's the website number again there?
It's www.heritagemaps.ie. These are the maps that the Heritage Council is working on for Heritage Map Viewer. This was the main site, the one over there, Heritage Maps. And if you wanted to flick into that, it gives you the whole country. And everybody, all the heritage officers around the country have been accessing this and adding their information to it. There's been a delay in getting our information from South Dublin up on the site. But if you look at the layers down here, this is not behaving. Just like, is it children and pets never behave the way you want them to. So,
And computers.
and computers, there you go. So this site will actually give you all of the recorded monuments in the county, and give you other information from the National Museum, National Roads Authority, burial grounds. Again, if you're into shipwrecks, there you go. All those options are there for you in archaeology, in architecture, habitats, geology, it's all there. But it depends on the different counties putting their information up. And as I said, there's been a delay in putting our own information up, but I hope to clear that block in the new year. But that website is active for the whole country. So if you're going on your holidays down to Waterford, I don't put it there, you can check it out and see what things you might be able to see while you're there. So I'll leave it at that before I get drawn on to something else and you're here at 9 o'clock tonight. So thanks very much.
Carvings
Lots of those features that
stones, so they can pick out the names, and they're putting those names in as part of the information. Other communities are doing things like working on place names and adding in those as part of the heritage of parishes and counties and time. And then lastly, in rural areas and particularly mountain areas, and Kerry are leading with this, they're recording the pilgrim plans that are not generally written about. The famous ones certainly are. But 16 onwards, perhaps some of those could be included.
I was out to assist one of the historians up in Glensmore Valley who had been recording place names, field names up in Glensmore Valley for the last number of years. So we've just produced that map, and there's a preliminary book going with that, which again I hope next year with funding to be able to produce that into a nice big map with a nice folder with all the field names in it. And there's a little bit more work to be done with it, and I hope the person sitting beside you there, Tomas, might give us a hand with looking at some of the Irish names. Because a lot of the field names up there would have originated in the Irish and have been kind of, changed and adapted over the years. So there is a lot of work to be done to tease out those. There you go.
Come through there, yeah. Michael there, young lad with the check shirt.
Two things you don't mind. As you know, we go to the Somme every year, and it's a Somme salient. There's a brilliant panoramic photograph. They've joined them all together of the salient from 100 years ago and the current, what it currently looks like now. But you have arrows pointing down to the features of the town and the villages on certain battlefields and monuments and all that, But if you go to the top of the square shot, it said there's a lovely panoramic view of the hills. The hills go around like that. I often thought if somebody could create that photograph and have these features, which we're now coming down and saying that's the small valley, that's the hill. Because people in the county know the hills, but they don't know which hill is which and what's the feature and where. If I want to go to the Hellfire Club, where is it?
I've often thought that there another location for that is in Old Bawn, when you're in the park there by the Dodder. You come out of Mountain View, is it? No, Seskin View, is it? And you literally have that panorama in front of you over the Dodder. I mean, it's hard to believe that, like in a capital city, you've got that backdrop of the mountains there. It's just
the Green Hills
fantastic.
Road, the city centre, and you can see it there. It's amazing. But I think that makes make a great photograph with the features made, with the habit would be great. But maybe it's something you can look at. And the other thing is a few years ago we were talking about the possible discovery of a ring fort over in Kingswood near Balgone. Is that proceeded any more further?
Again, that photograph was I could probably find it for you. The archaeologists in UCD came to me because they, again, in looking at their LiDAR information, were able to see that there was a feature on one of the ring forts. It's recognised as a ring fort, but it didn't seem to have the archaeological importance that they felt it should have. There you go. It's a tribal. Exactly, yeah. Whereas the archaeological record for that didn't identify it as a trivalent ring fort. it's got 3 loops around it, three rings around it, yeah.
High status.
Yeah, and they were looking for funding from the heritage officer to assist in doing some geophysical work out there, which we did. But unfortunately, there was too much interference in the soil. They felt it had a high contamination of something in it, which wasn't giving them the signal that they thought they should get, given what the photograph was showing them. So that is one of the sites that they would love to go back to and do some proper excavation work on
But do you think
to
that
identify it.
more or less that's not tribal?
They still feel it is.
Or you think it is?
Oh, they feel it is, yeah.
Because there was talk that the kind of wing.
No, they feel it certainly is, but that the geophysical survey didn't produce the results that they were hoping, and they're putting it down to some contamination in the soil, which was bouncing all over the place. Sorry?
We had that discussion that it definitely is, but it's a great image that is. Really.
It's fantastic, like, and again, that is, that LiDAR is fantastic. They wouldn't have seen that from, I think they were working on the
Is there
M7 and
anything
they had a lot of
visible on the
photographs around
surface?
it. It's an arable field as far as I know. Or is it a grass? Might be a grass field, a pasture field. But yeah, they would have to go back and do some proper excavation work on that. There were a number of other sites that they saw in the report as well. You know, probably don't have a lot of time left. But I have other photographs here of some of the sites that the archaeologists looked at. Athgall Hill has shown up a couple of other additional features. Windmill Hill, you know, beside the road, has 3 or 4 other features on it that, you know, haven't been identified before. So LiDAR is offering a lot of information, and I suppose that brings us back to Leo Swan, who had done quite a lot of work in his day with aerial photography, using aerial photography to identify archaeological sites. Today they're using LiDAR, which is very, very, very nice. It gives you a lovely view of the landscape. It isn't always right, and it isn't always useful, but when it is, it's very useful. I think in a situation like this.
It never went to Ballyode. It used to be there, I don't know if it's still there. There's a very large section of it and very, very complete.
Yeah.
Would that be included in this?
Well, believe it or not, it is one of the actions in there to look at the Pale Ditch. Just haven't gotten around to focusing on it. But there are a number of sections in Archaeology here up at Kiltalon. There's supposed to be a section there.
The dump is very close to when I last saw it. Very close.
Yeah, absolutely.
The honourable member for Trinity.
Two small questions. How far with the 4 excavations did they go down, and how high a priority in the county is archaeology?
Well, I'll answer the last one first, I think. The county would certainly benefit from an archaeological post in the council, but unfortunately I can't see the chances of that happening to be very high, just in terms of resources and priorities. But my job is spread across archaeology, architecture, cultural heritage and biodiversity. And because the council has a conservation architect, then you know that kind of looks after a lot of the built, and she also looks after the statutory requirements for archaeology. So it would certainly benefit from a focused archaeological post, but as I say, I can't see that happening. We'd also benefit from a biodiversity officer's post and lots of other cultural heritage posts, but as I say, that's for another day. They only went down to 50 centimetres at the very most, I believe, while they were there, if that. So it was just test trenches. We didn't want to disturb more than we needed to in order to get an idea as to whether it was worth coming back to do more, and that's what we intend doing this year, next year.
Rather, just one tiny observation. You know, in the picture of the gatehouse in Ballymount Park, maybe we should be more careful about where we put M50 signs. You know, the M50 sign is the biggest part of the background there.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, do you require planning permission for those? I'm not sure.
There's a couple of those over the Sugar room there.
Sorry?
There's a Sugar room there.
Yeah. Yeah.
and they stuck the Lewis over the top of it.
Yeah, there was a lot of archaeological excavation work done during the whole development of the M50.
Yeah, but they didn't even, the first one they done for the M50 there, they only went back a certain period of time. The last one was done, O'Neill done it for the Lewis. He actually, in his, the booklet they done up for it, he actually put it down as a 3-ring fort equal to Navan. What do you call it? There's kind of a thing about what do you call it, that it was a burial site there, but they reckon that there's evidence that the ditches were actually, 2 of the ditches were actually dug up and reused by the Normans when they colonised, and there's a chance that that's the shape now for the tomb. They actually cut the top off the top of it and turned it into a fort.
Yeah, that's what I'd imagine.
That's Kingswood there on the photograph, isn't it? That's Kingswood there.
That's here.
Kingswood, yeah. So presumably if it was a high status 3-ring fort or whatever, perhaps the name evolved from that, you know.
The Iron Ditch. There's one section of
Yeah, very good. There's not much of it left, is it?
Living in stone.
Well, folks, I'd like show your appreciation. Wonderful lecture, heritage officer. I'm sure you had a great number of friends coming in here beforehand, and you converted those that were talking about the break. So with that, when's the next lecture? January?
January 12th.
Yeah, it only leaves me to wish you all a very, very happy and peaceful Christmas. So, Nullik Shuma, Captain, and I'll be saying, Slán a while, Slán